La siguiente presentación está a cargo de Ingrid Dilo. Ingrid es directora adjunta de DANS, Archivo de Datos y Servicios en Red, en los Países Bajos. Es copresidenta del Consejo de Research Data Alliance, RDA, y coordinadora de proyectos del proyecto europeo Horizon 2020, FAIRsFAIR. Tiene un doctorado en Historia y ha trabajado en el campo del desarrollo de políticas durante los últimos 30 años, incluso como asesora principal de políticas en el Ministerio de Educación, Cultura y Ciencia y en la Biblioteca Nacional de los Países Bajos. Entre sus áreas de especialización se encuentra la gestión de datos de investigación y la certificación de repositorios digitales. Ingrid nos presenta su charla Compartir datos de investigación, ¿un cuento de hadas? Les recordamos que pueden hacer sus preguntas a través del chat de Zoom o a través del hashtag BiblioU2021. Por último, si necesitan el servicio de traducción, no olviden pinchar el icono de la barra inferior de su sesión de Zoom y de ahí seleccionar el idioma de su preferencia. Recuerden también apagarlo cuando ya no lo necesiten. Ingrid, hola, muchas gracias por estar acá. Te dejamos el espacio para que puedas interactuar con nuestra audiencia.
Thank you very much, Catalina, for your nice introduction. So let me first see whether I can share my screen with you. So there we go. So it should get into presentation mode. There we go. I think we're all set. So good morning, everyone. And thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me today. I'm really honored and excited to speak to you all. And as you can see, I'm speaking to you from my home office in the Netherlands. And I imagine that the most of you are also at home in your home office working today. Before I start, I need to apologize and warn those of you who attended the webinar last October of the CEPAL library in Chile, where I spoke about FAIR and Trust. Part of my presentation today will overlap with that talk that I presented at that occasion, and I'm very sorry about that, if that is the case for you. So here you see a short overview of the topics that I want to talk to you about. First, I'll say a few words about the institute that I come from. Then I will talk about data sharing and the reasoning behind all of that. Then I will turn to data quality issues. From there, go to the concept of fair data, and finally talk to you about the role that libraries could play in the arena of research data management. But let's start with a quick look at the institute that I come from in the Netherlands. That institute is called DANS, Data Archive and Network Services, and we are a national institute with a mission to enhance the reusability of research data. And we provide a couple of data services, and we are also the National Center of Expertise for Research Data. We are an organization of the Dutch Research Council, as well as the Dutch Academy of Arts and Sciences, and we have been around for 15 years. And we have our original roots in the social sciences and humanities. So on this slide, you see the different services that we offer. First of all, we have a long-term archive in which we now have around 160,000 data sets available. Next to that, we also provide a solution for a midterm storage of data based on Dataverse technology. And finally, the third of our technical services is a metadata portal called Narcis. And Narcis holds metadata on all the scholarly information in the Netherlands. So it gives you the metadata of all the publications, data sets, but also researchers, research institutes, and research projects. So those are the technical services. And here you see an overview of the data holdings of some of the major repositories around the world, in numbers of data sets. And this is the situation of July 2020. And as you can see, DANS is a good player, and you could say it's really a major international player if you look at the amount of data sets that we have. But next to those technical services, DANS also plays an important role also internationally as a center of expertise in the area of research data management. So we provide training materials and trainings, and we also have a lot of information available for our community, and we also do a lot of consultancy work. We also participate in a lot of European projects around research data and research infrastructure. So that, first of all, as a short introduction on where I come from. Then let's talk about data sharing. Why is that important? Well, I know that in Latin America, open science is widespread. Open science is a goal that is being embraced by many, many funders and policymakers around the globe. And with open science, we of course mean the free exchange of information for the good of science, but just as well for society at large. And here you see some examples from my own country, but also a lot of international organizations have paid a lot of attention and are promoting open science, ranging from the European Commission to the OECD and the United Nations, as you can see on this slide. Now, open science is, of course, all about transparency and about the ease of access for everyone to all the products of science. So within open science, elements like transparent research practices are important, open access publishing, but also I think that data sharing is an aspect that you can consider as a really vital component of realizing open science. So that data sharing is important because it gives you the opportunity to replicate research outcomes and to validate research outcomes. So it is all about the integrity and the transparency of science. You need to be able to replicate research in order to make it transparent and to check. And what happens if you do not have this possibility, you can see here. Here you see a number of headlines from the international press on a very famous Dutch case of scientific fraud a couple of years ago. It concerned really a major case where a researcher falsified data and also even made up data. And that caused a lot of debate also amongst the general public. And you can imagine that that really harmed the trust that the general public also has in science. So that is one aspect. Another aspect of the importance of data sharing is that it gives you the possibility to reuse data. And that reuse of data brings more efficiency in research. It leads to a bigger return on the public investment that we all do with our tax money in funding research. And it, of course, also advances science because it offers the opportunity to stand on the shoulders of others, to make use of work that others have done before you as a researcher. And I think the current time that we live in emphasizes this importance very much. So in order to conquer the COVID pandemic, we need research data to be openly available as quickly as possible, without, of course, compromising the quality of the research. So striking the right balance between, openness and rapid having the data rapidly available with the quality of research is vitally important. And this slide holds a reference to an article that was recently published, and that is based on the work that we have done within the Research Data Alliance around COVID. And you can see here that it states that in order to make good decisions about how to deal with the current situation and plan for the future, high quality, reliable, and trusted data are needed. So data sharing is vital. So if it is so important to share data, and there are so many good reasons, you would imagine that the cartoon that you see here on the left side will certainly be outdated by now. It says the data are mine, and you see the researcher in the ivory tower. But is that true? Is it really true that nowadays all the data are free for picking for everyone? Well, I don't think so. Here you see an overview, a graph that comes from a recently published report that is called The State of Open Data and gives you an insight in the situation last year. And you can see that trust is an aspect that is present in a lot of the concerns that researchers have when they are asked to share their data. So you can see that they have concerns about possible misuse of their data, not receiving appropriate credit or acknowledgement, and further down reasons like others might find errors in my data. So you can see that trust really is at the heart of all those issues that researchers have with sharing their data. And let us keep that trust element in mind, and then let's move on to the next topic, the topic of data quality. So we saw that the producers of the data have issues with respect to the trust that they need to put into the reuser of their data. But that same situation counts for the reusers of data sets that were produced by others as well, because they struggle with questions like, where do these data come from? And how were they collected? And what has happened with them along the way? So these questions deal with quality as well as with the provenance of the data that those researchers want to reuse. So I think when you look and when you think about data quality, there are different dimensions that you need to take into account. There is a scientific quality to the data. There is an element of fitness for use. And there is also an element of technical quality. So first, the dimension of scientific quality. Of course, you want the data that you reuse to be the result of high quality science. And that high quality science should, of course, be based on principles like honesty and transparency and independence and responsibility. Making sure that you have that scientific integrity in the research is, to my mind, really a shared responsibility. Of course, it's the responsibility of the researcher, him or herself, but also the institution in which that researcher works has a responsibility to make sure that the work is done in the right way. And we also know, thirdly, that the peers of a researcher also play a very important role in creating the right culture in which scientific integrity can really blossom. So scientific quality is the first dimension of data quality, to my mind. The second dimension looks at it from a different way. You can also say that quality is not an absolute given. The quality also depends in a way on the use, in a sense that it is in the eye of the beholder. Judgment of the data quality depends on the data consumer. And you can imagine that the fitness for use of the fitness for purpose is a very important element when a reuser decides whether he wants to reuse a data set or not. You know, you can have a perfectly documented, beautiful data set, but if it really doesn't completely fit with your research question, and there is another data set that is maybe a little bit messy, but much more fit for purpose, you might choose the second one. So this element of fitness for use is also an element you need to take into account when you think about data quality. Now, the third element, to my mind, is the technical quality of the data. Data, like any other product, is the result of a process that generated the data. So that process consists, you see here on the slide, the research data lifecycle. That process consists of many steps around the management and the documentation of the data. So that whole process through the research, and even starting before the research, of data gathering, managing, documenting, really also defines the technical quality of your data. And when we think about the technical quality, we run into this concept of fair data. And that is the concept that I want to dive into a little bit deeper with you. I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of you is familiar with the principles, but to make sure, let me dive into it a little bit on the basics. So the fair data principles were designed, you could say, in 2014 at a workshop in my home country in the Netherlands, even in a place just 15 kilometers from here in Leiden. And I happened to be at that very meeting. It was a meeting within the context of the life sciences. And there, for the first time, this minimal set of community agreed guiding principles was formulated. So it is all about those 4 letters, the F for findable, and that has to do with the findability of data. So data and supplementary materials should have enough metadata to understand them, and also a unique and persistent identifier. The second element is around the accessibility of the data. That means that the metadata and the data themselves should be understandable both to humans as well as machines. And the data should be deposited in a trustworthy repository. The I stands for interoperability of the data. That means that metadata should use a formal, accessible, and shared, and also a broadly applicable language for knowledge representation. So here it becomes more complicated. It's easier to comply with the F and the A than it is with the I and the R. And the R stands for reusability, which means that data and collections should have clear licenses and also provide accurate information on provenance, of course. So this is the concept, really the basic concept behind the FAIR principles. So 2 years after the this first concept was born, an article was published in Nature Scientific Data, and you might probably know it, on the FAIR principles that received a lot of attention and is quoted after 2016 many, many times, and you find a link to it here if you're interested. What also happened was that people dove deeper into those quite generic principles, and we now have 15 criteria or metrics, you could say, that further refine the different principles with, let's say, criteria that a data set needs to meet in order to comply with a principle. So again, with findable, you see that you need to have metadata that have and data that have a persistent identifier, that have rich metadata, etc., etc. So this was a further refinement of the FAIR principles. Now, the FAIR principles were really embraced by a lot of people, especially, I think, by policymakers and funders. They were frontline in the row. And you can see a reflection of that on this slide, where you see a couple of important European reports that were published around turning FAIR into reality. And you can also see that in the big European research funding program called Horizon 2020, FAIR was a very important element in the data management. So in Europe, we see that the FAIR principles for data were firmly embraced by policymakers and funders. But what do the researchers themselves think about the FAIR principles? Then you get a slightly different view. So here you see again a graph from that open data, State of Open Data report. And in this diagram, you can see that even in 2020, still some 40% of the researchers, and there were researchers in this survey from all around the world, and 40% of them had never heard of the principles. And only 1 out of the 4 researchers that they interviewed was really familiar with the FAIR principles. So to my mind, the FAIR principles are more firmly rooted at the policy and funder level than they are at the moment amongst the researchers themselves. And this is also an interesting one. The slides that you see, the graphs that you see here come from European work in a project called FAIRsFAIR, which really deals with the implementation of the FAIR principles in the European research framework context. And the graph on the left-hand side shows you that of those researchers who are familiar with the FAIR principles, only 1/3 of them state that their research data management practices are in practice compliant with those FAIR principles. So there is also a difference between the people who are aware of them and the people who really apply them in their daily work. And when we look at the European universities, we see that the FAIR principles are much more known amongst the data experts and management and policy makers than they are amongst the researchers and the students themselves. And this shows that it's quite difficult to reach out with this work to the researchers. So a little bit more about the concept of FAIR. What does it really mean? Well, first of all, I think that we have seen over the years and around the globe that the principles sometimes cause confusion, and people also interpret them in different ways because they are really high level. For me, I always say that you shouldn't see it as a black and white thing. So I really think we need to approach the FAIR principles as a continuum. You need to, as a researcher, to be as fair as possible with your data set. But sometimes you will not be able to reach 100% fairness according to the metrics, for example, because you deal with sensitive data. It's also important to state that openness and fairness are not the same. An open data set can very well not be completely fair because it has, very little metadata. And a completely fair data set can very well not be open because it contains sensitive information. So the two concepts are different and do not necessarily completely align. And then, of course, it's also the case that open data does not always mean that they are freely available, that they are free of charge. So there still is some confusion there with amongst some researchers, I think. I think FAIR is really a buzzword that has helped us a lot in putting research data management higher on the agenda. But in the end, I also think that to a certain extent, it is, let's say, old wine in new bottles, because I think in essence, it's all about responsible management of your data. Having said that, I would like, as the final topic, to dive in deeper into the role that libraries can play in promoting or working with the FAIR principles. And I would like to give you 5 suggestions on how libraries can get started with the FAIR principles. Now, I believe that libraries have a strong tradition in describing resources, providing access, and also in building collections. And they're also quite well positioned to provide support for the long-term stewardship of digital resources. I believe that building on their specific knowledge and expertise, libraries really should feel confident with the topic of making research data fair. Research libraries should play a key role in research data management. They could support the entire data lifecycle through the provision of knowledge and skills, but also of infrastructure and tools. And I think that with their support for researchers, libraries have an important responsibility to make sure that fair data sharing does not remain a fairy tale, but really becomes a reality. I think libraries are key there. So university libraries should act as a kind of front office for research data management. And that front office should serve the local community of researchers. And what they could provide, for example, is awareness raising around FAIR principles and research data management, training and support, but also tools and services, infrastructure, for example, virtual research environments for data sharing during research. So there are many crucial areas where libraries can play a role. But then, of course, the question is, where do you start? And what I would like to do is to give you a couple of practical suggestions that I have run into in my work. And for that, I'll also lean a little bit on work that is done by LIBER. And LIBER is the European Coalition of Research Libraries. And you see a link to their work on this slide. So the first thing I would like to suggest is that libraries promote the FAIR principles among their local research communities. And one tool that could help is the tool that you see here that comes from the FAIRsFAIR project, which is called FAIRaware. And this tool can help researchers and also data stewards to better understand the FAIR principles. It gives you, it's an online tool, it gives you 10 simple questions that you can answer with a yes or a no. And behind it is a wealth of information and suggestions to make data sets more fair. So this is really a tool that you can use to raise awareness and that researchers can use before they start gathering their data. So here you see one example. If a researcher answers that they find it hard to understand metadata for citation and discovery, here you see a quick snapshot from the tool where it provides then the information, a lot of information about things you need to think about according to this topic. And it also gives you links and suggestions for reading, etc., etc. Another very concrete suggestion of a tool that you could use to raise awareness around the FAIR principles and data management is using one of the many games that are available. So that works as a kind of lightweight introduction to research data management. And here you see one example, the Dance Data game that we developed, available in a hard copy version. That you can get through our dance website. But it's also available as an online game, and you see the link to the YouTube video here. So this is a nice game that gives an impression of the research data landscape, and it was especially produced for the 15th anniversary of our organization. So next to awareness raising and promotion, another suggestion would be to incorporate the FAIR principles in data management plans. And there is still a world to win there. As you can see on this slide, around 60% of the researchers that were questioned rarely or even never created a data management plan for their research. And this pie chart shows that half of the researchers feel that they need extra training when it comes to writing data management plans. And three aspects seem to be most challenging for researchers. It is the aspect of long-term storage and data management strategies. That's one. And also understanding and defining policies for access, for sharing, and for reuse of data is an area where they say that they need training. And finally, we also see that, especially amongst early career researchers, costing and budget planning for their research and the management of their data is an element where they say they need more training. So from this survey, it's pretty clear that we can help researchers by providing training on writing data management plans. So again, what is available around the world? I think the Research Data Alliance has done a lot of very valuable work there. And on this slide, you see one of the tools that is available and comes from a work within the RDA. And that is a tool called 23 Things, Libraries for Research Data. This provides a very practical overview of resources that are free and online available, and it also gives you links to tools that can be used and that you researchers can incorporate in their research data management. So this is very useful, and the nice thing is that it's also available in Spanish. And this work has also been further developed in Australia, where they really built a whole program out of this RDA work that was followed by many university libraries in Australia. So this might also be something that is useful for libraries to really help researchers with data management and writing data management plans. Another example is this Research Data Management Cookbook. And this cookbook is also the result from work within RDA. It's called Engaging Researchers with Data Management, and it holds a collection of case studies drawn from all kinds of institutions across the globe that really clearly and practically demonstrate how to engage with the research community. And it also gives really practical tips on how to help people with data management planning. The third element that would be important for libraries to think about is, of course, the training. I already mentioned it. That is a very important instrument. And around the world, we see a large amount of training materials available already. And so you need to go to overviews and registries. And here you see two examples of such registries. One from the Open Air project that gives you train the trainer resources. And the other one comes from the European Open Science Cloud, where you can see that there are 87 courses and training materials listed around data management. And as a front office, I think the staff of a university library really needs to have a certain level of expertise in these areas in order to be able to support and train the local researchers. But also so this is an example, of an online training for library staff. It is the Essentials for Data Support course. Which is an introductory course for data experts developed in the Netherlands. It's online and it gives you, so you can follow it, it's in English, and it gives you a lot of information around the different phases of data management. And there is a lot also available, a section on data management planning. So this is a very useful training for people at universities. So interesting maybe to have a look at. And then, of course, around the globe, there are also training, there's a lot of training material available online that is focused on the researchers themselves. And a lot of them are, to a certain extent, domain specific. And that is very important because, you know, you want to train people within different disciplines with the right disciplinary metadata, vocabularies, tools, etc. And on this slide, you see examples from the life sciences as well as the social sciences. So loads of training available online, both for data stewards as well as researchers themselves. Then there is the element of long-term preservation, and I'm getting close to the end of my presentation. I think libraries also have a role in pointing researchers to trustworthy repositories for the long-term preservation of the data. We saw from the State of the Open Data report that researchers have problems to identify repositories to store their data after the research is finished. And here it is important to realize that a lot of the requirements that make data fair are provided in practice by the environment in which a data set lives. So for example, it is the repository that provides the data set with a persistent identifier and that makes sure that the data set is indexed in a searchable resource. So if a researcher deposits the data in a certified trustworthy repository, that offers the best guarantee that the data set has a basic level of fairness and will also remain fair over time. And on this slide, you see an example of an organization, CoreTrustSeal, which is international, that offers such a certification. And as you can see on the map, there are already a large number of repositories that carry that seal. Finally, I think, as the last suggestion, it would be good if university libraries would be able to evaluate the data collections at their institution against the FAIR principles. And over the last few years, a lot of work has been done to create tools for such a fair assessment of data. And again, in the European FAIRsFAIR project, we have developed an automated tool for that called the Fuji tool. And you can see here on the slide, I have an example of a COVID-related data set that I ran through the tool. And as you can see on the slide, it gives a result and it says that this data set has a 54% fairness. And you can see that the 4 principles are measured according to certain metrics. And you can also see where that data set failed. And the tool gives you a lot of information on how to improve the technical quality of the data so that you can improve the fairness. But it also is a nice assessment tool for a library or a funder to see what the situation is with respect to the fairness of data sets. So with this, I have come to the end of my talk. And here you see again the suggestions given by LIBE for libraries to get started with the FAIR principles. So I hope that the practical examples and tools that I have shown will help you to promote and also to improve data sharing at your own institutions. And now I'm available for questions. So thank you very much for listening, and I will stop sharing my screen now.
Bien, muchas gracias, Ingrid, por tu excelente conferencia. De seguro, ahora voy a iniciar el video. No puedo. Bueno, gracias por tu excelente conferencia. Seguro es un aporte para potenciar nuestro desempeño profesional. Y hay mucha gente que está interesada en hacerte preguntas. Te comento que tenemos participación de toda Latinoamérica y hay más de 700 personas conectadas. Así que hay muchas preguntas y vamos a empezar, vamos a tratar de considerar las que más podamos dentro del tiempo que tenemos. La primera pregunta que te vamos a hacer y que empieza con un comentario es, Ingrid, sobre el rol de las bibliotecas. Dice que deben promover y aplicar los principios FAIR, capacitar a los investigadores, preservar y evaluar los datos científicos. Según tu experiencia, ¿cómo logramos que los bibliotecarios y bibliotecarias asuman un rol más activo en ciencia abierta y datos científicos?
Thank you very much for that interesting question. That's a difficult question, of course. I think what I see, at least in Europe, because I'm more familiar with the situation there than I am with the Latin American situation, of course. But what I have seen over the years is that libraries, university libraries, are really looking for new ways to position themselves within the universities, also with the whole shift to the digital world. And what I have seen is that a lot of the university libraries are now investing. Of course, it starts with investing in, let's say, training of your own staff, because in order to be able to fulfill that role as a front office and to be of service to your local researchers, you need to have the know-how in the house first. So I think that would be the first step, to make sure that you train part of the library staff in all those aspects of research data management, and FAIR as part of that research data management. And once you have that expertise, you can reach out to your own local community. And like I said, I think it's important to look around in the world in a digital way to see what is already available, because there is a lot available that can help you with building that expertise. And I would also like to suggest to you to have a look at the website of the Research Data Alliance, what is happening there, because, for example, there is a very active library group there that does a lot of work in the area of research data. So that could be one of the starting points. So I think, you need first to make that shift and to build your own knowledge base, and then reach out to the community. But we could talk for hours about this, because it's really a big topic to catch in a couple of sentences. Thank you.
Bien, muchas gracias, Ingrid, nuevamente por tu excelente respuesta. Ahora vamos a la segunda pregunta, realizada por Maribel Alvarado. Ella pregunta: ¿cuáles son los principales elementos de un servicio de gestión de datos de investigación? ¿Y cuáles son las competencias que debemos desarrollar los bibliotecarios para este nuevo desafío?
I think the elements that you ideally would offer to your community would be, on the one hand, it's the awareness raising and promotion element. That is really the first one. Then the second one is, of course, providing support to the researchers in your community in writing, for example, data management plans. So, of course, you need then a policy within the university that data management plans are mandatory. So I also see from practice that the university library is not always in the powerful position. They don't write the policies for the university, of course, but it would be, if there is a policy like that, the university library should provide the support, so should sit with the researchers. And ideally, you would have different people, let's say, data stewards within the library for the different domains, because it's also very important that a data steward has some domain knowledge in order to, help the researcher with picking the right formats for the data, thinking about the right metadata schema. So that is another important element. And then on the other side, we're talking about services and tools. So I think it's important that each institution has a virtual research environment where researchers can share their data and store their data during research. And then I think it's also important that the data stewards try to convince the researchers that it's important that when they close their research, the data are transferred to really a long-term safekeeping place, like a certified repository, whether that is a domain repository or, a more generic repository. But it's very important to choose a trustworthy repository that has a certification, because that gives you the best guarantee for long-term preservation and long-term accessibility of the data. And then finally, when it comes to competencies, there is a lot to say about that. In a couple of European projects, competence frameworks have been developed, but I do not have that right in the top of my head. So if someone is really interested in getting pointers to that, please send me an email and I'll figure it out for you. And I think the slides will become available and you can see my email address on the slide. And I'll stop there.
Bien. Muchas gracias, Ingrid, nuevamente por tu respuesta. Ahora va una última pregunta, realizada por Lourdes Feria. Ingrid, ¿conoces alguna buena práctica de sensibilización en FAIR Data para los investigadores que pudieras recomendarnos?
Well, again, I'd like to refer back to my presentation. I gave you two examples. The first one, the FAIRware tool, which I think is an excellent instrument and quite a simple instrument for researchers to use, that can really raise awareness of all, the things they need to think about before they start their data collection. So that is a very good tool to suggest to people. And then secondly, I think, promoting, if you have, I could imagine that you organize events with researchers where you make use of one of the, I gave you one example of the dance data game, but there are more. So really try to find, nice, lightweight ways to promote those FAIR principles. But again, the FAIRware tool is really a very useful one, I think. Lightweight, but also serious in a sense that it really gives good suggestions and it's also a learning tool for people.
Bien, muchas gracias, Ingrid, por tu excelente conferencia nuevamente y también por el tiempo que te tomaste en hacer las preguntas.